Hello, everyone. I'm Shannon Torrance, and welcome to Magic is Real, a podcast focused on proof of afterlife, whose mission is to bring hope and inspiration to others and to spread the word that death is only an illusion. If these interviews resonate with you and you want to hear more like them, you can support the podcast by liking, subscribing, and sharing with like-minded friends. Thank you so much, and thank you for being a part of the Magic is Real family. I wish you peace, light, and love always. Hi, Magic is Real listeners. I'm Shannon Torrance. I'm a little hoarse today. Have a little bit of laryngitis, but I'm here with my friend Ishtar, who is a near-death experiencer, but that's not all. He is overall a person living a spiritual life who has a very interesting spiritual journey that he will share with us today. He is coming to us from Portugal. Thank you so much for being here, Ishtar.
Oh, thank you, Shannon. Thank you muchly.
It is, I am so happy to have you today. I have heard your story and there's so much to it. So first of all, I'd love it if you would introduce yourself in terms of telling the listeners kind of who you are, what your life looks like today. I know that you do a lot of different things, so I'd like you to share it rather than me try to summarize.
Hmm. Well, let's see. I'm kind of a big nobody in the best sense of that term. But to give the bullet points of what I'm up to in life and kind of what fills my days and gets me out of bed in the morning. I think my meditation. I work as a meditation teacher, and that was not something that I was as a child thinking, oh, I got to go be a meditation teacher. Even when I was a little bit older and I thought I need to be a monk, I didn't want to be. I wanted to be cloistered in a certain sense. So I wanted to do it just for my own development. And I thought, oh, meditation teaching, it's probably not up my alley. But I remember my first course teaching meditation. It was back in 2004, and I just loved it. So I've been doing that ever since. And that, for probably, practically speaking, for better and for worse, has driven much of my life and brought me into my other passions, hobbies, professions, which are numerous, like anybody else. I love to garden. I did that professionally for many years, back on the Oregon coast and in and around Portland, Oregon. And that's another thing that I sort of fell into by accident, because we had this. I was living in an ashram at the time, and we had a very big yard to the side, and it just was calling for flowers and shrubs to be planted in, and we beautified the hell out of it, and we had this wonderful cafe. So I really wanted to do window boxes with the others. And then we started getting hired for jobs, and all of a sudden you're driving a truck and you've got like yards and yards of bark dust behind you, and you're working every day doing it. So an accident. I'm also work as a writer, and the writing that I do, like I think like any other writer, has been all over the map. What I'm working on now is sort of a semi-secret television project, which I can't really talk too much about. But I'm also working on 3 or 4 books, very different books. One of them, I've been sort of invited to write some sort of spiritual memoir, because I've had a very crazy life in some ways, and others I just like writing sci-fi and fantasy and fiction. And another book I'm working on is on intuitive development, which the diehard materialists in the audience might think of as under the aegis of fiction as well. So, but that's what my writing activity is like. And I used to remodel houses, and I love that. So I'm kind of a home and garden type of enthusiast. And then I also work as an astrologer, and kind of an intuitive astrologer. So, and the heart of that work, which is kind of like the heart of the meditation teaching, because I love to do whatever it is that I can do to sort of be of assistance in helping people fall into themselves. With astrology, what I really love is seeing people kind of connect to their own grain, as it were, and relax and let go, and I kind of have a sense of, okay, I know what the symphony my authentic symphony sounds like. And by hearing that authentic symphony, I'm able to better shove off all the things that are inauthentic. So
Yeah.
that's my work.
I love
And
it. And it sounds like a really enviable life, considering I think in the Western world, it's great that if people enjoy working in the corporate world, that's wonderful for them. I just know that I'm not that type of person. And only later in life did I start to realize that I could make a living doing a lot of different things and I can do things that I love and can be of service in ways that are more spiritual or artistic and creative. And I think
mm,
anyone who's given the opportunity to do that is so fortunate, because it's not always easy. It's not
yeah.
like you went to college or going, I'm going to become a meditation teacher. There's a lot of money in that. I'm going to have
Yeah,
great
no.
stability. But it's so wonderful to see people thriving and experiencing abundance in all the ways, doing such interesting work and getting to be creative. And every day is different. And I think it took me a long time to get there myself. So I'm happy for you. I think that's so great. And you're allowed to be of service. So I'm considering all of these spiritual things that you do and your spiritual interests. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how you were drawn to these types of these types of I don't know, modalities and also
Mm,
professions. I know this started very young for you. You're a
mhm.
person who is one of the few I've spoken with who actually had a near-death experience very young, but even before your near-death
Yeah.
experience. Tell me about some of your spiritual experiences when you were a child.
Presence, light, silence, a sense of being, a sense of being one with everything in a very palpable sort of way. All those things were what characterized a great deal of my childhood experience. Even alongside, all the times when, like skin my knee and I'm crying because it's bleeding, or I'm really unhappy about something that my sister or my parents are doing, or even in the temper tantrums, which I didn't have a lot of those, but I remember it was as if while I was having those things, underneath them and kind of around them was this soft, quiet, vast, dimensionless space that was really always there. And I think I have very early memories. I'm not supposed to have those, according to my high school senior year AP psychology textbook. I wasn't supposed to go past 2.5 or 3 or something like that. But I remember being in the crib. I remember not being able to walk, and I remember my attempts at trying to walk and sort of falling down and all that sort of stuff, and all those things, that quietude was there. One of my favorite things as a child was getting up very early. And of course, I don't know how early. I didn't have a clock, and I probably wouldn't have been able to read the clock either at that time. But it would still be dark outside my bedroom windows, and I would just be sitting there quiet in kind of a meditative posture. And I was fascinated to just look at things. Like I had a sense that I was in the curtains. I had a sense that I was sort of in the crib, and both localized to my body but very non-local. And I would remember when my mother would come in, and when she would wake up, which is about the time that the sun was coming up, and then she would greet me, and she used my closet as like a second closet. So she'd grab stuff and go out the door and come back, an elaborate dance. And some of the weird things which of course I didn't think of as weird at the time, started to happen then. Notably, I remember probably the first ghost I saw. I was again sitting in my little crib doing my thing, just watching. All of a sudden, an old lady with curly white gray hair, walks into my room like everybody else. And my maternal grandmother had stayed in the room before, and my maternal aunt had also stayed in that room. I remember them coming in, and this lady who came in had hair that looked like my grandma's hair, except this lady was smaller than my grandma. My maternal grandma was quite a tall lady. This lady was shorter. She had a blue nightgown on and a white lace collar, and I just kind of watched her, and she didn't look at me, which I thought was interesting, because everybody would look, but I could feel her attention. touching me in a certain way. I had a sense that something was touching me, and it seemed benevolent enough. And I just watched her walk on by, and then the thing that struck me was she walked right clear out the back wall of my bedroom. And I was quite amazed by that. I was like, hey, I've never seen that before. And I started hashing plans that when I could get myself out of the crib and I could walk, I would try it out, and I'd walk into the wall. Years later, I was, could walk and talk, and I was looking in a picture book, a family picture book with my mom, and she was going through things, and then I saw the lady in the picture book, and
Was
the
she?
little the I'll just keep it open. The lady I saw, who walked by the crib, was a spitting image of my great grandmother, my maternal grandmother's mother. My mother would go on and always tell me about my great grandmother, saying, "Oh, she would have loved you. You two would have got on really well," etc., etc. But she died the year before I was born, and
Huh.
so I have no idea how old I was. I just know I couldn't walk yet, nor had I escaped from my crib for the first time, which was another one of those big milestones when I got over the crib. So it was before that. I have no
Yeah,
idea when that was,
that's so
but
interesting.
yeah,
I
yeah.
know I remember things from so far back that people can't remember that I mean, people have can't believe I remember it. Um, I always attributed that in myself to I am a very sensitive person. I'm a classic HSP, highly sensitive person.
Mm,
But also, it was just a very intense time for me. I mean, I had a great family, but I was very sensitive and very emotional. And I've said before on this podcast, so I'm repeating myself, but that I had a large birthmark on my face and people would stare and point. And so I felt very, very self-conscious, very young, and very aware of things in a way that psych the child psychologist my mom took me to actually thought I might be autistic because, and I
mm.
think, and I do remember seeing a man walk. I remember talking about this man I saw walking down our driveway. We lived in upstate New York. It was kind of woodsy, and I saw this man, and he had a top hat and a cane and like lapels walking down our driveway, and he had a beard, and I called him No Man, and which is pretty creepy. So I almost now I'm starting to put the pieces together that this might have
Uh-huh.
been. I thought maybe it was because I was sick. I think I might have had the chicken pox. I thought maybe I hallucinated these things, but now that
Mhm.
I look back and I've talked to people like you, I start to think I don't think that's all it was. I don't think that's all it was.
Yeah.
So it's possible. I don't know, but I find that so interesting that some of us can really remember so far back and very vividly. I mean, this was the 70s for me. And,
Mm.
it's like, it feels like yesterday. So I love hearing your story too. Um, and we don't, is there anything else you wanted to share about sort of what was pre the near death experience, or do you want to
Yeah,
just sort of,
well, sure, I can do that succinctly too. I'm looking at the time, but
oh, yeah.
I mean, it followed from there, especially after I was out of the crib and into the bed. Of that for it must have been like three. It was, between 3 and 7. I was really open for business, I suppose, with the other side. I at the time I didn't think of it concretely like, oh, I'm seeing ghosts or spirits. I thought, oh, this just could be my imagination because this is, but there was nothing wrong with the imagination, so I didn't shut it down like a lot of children seem to be forced to. But I would have, beings. Sometimes I would see them visually. Sometimes, in amongst other things, sometimes I'd seem to be seeing them appear. For me, that was kind of like a subtle sort of um, opaque overlay on top of everything else. So it was a little bit different way of sensing. Other times it was just, it seemed to be a gut feelings. I would have some kind of communications, but whatever it was, I had a lot of things coming into my room. And at the time, I was deeply into Jeremy Brett's portrayal of Sherlock Holmes in the 1980s in that wonderful Granada series. And so my mother had this old Sherlock Holmes costume, which strangely I could fit into parts of it. So I would put that on, I'd wear that hat, and I thought, and I would turn my room into sort of like a little consulting detective's office, only I would be helping the spirits. And I think that was a way that instinctively allowed me to not freak out at what was going on, kind of have a sense of environmental control and purpose and function. And what I would do is I'd sit down in my rocking chair, I'd have them sit across from me, one at a time. I would go into this, close my eyes, and I would somehow go into this big white space, like a brighter light, the brightest light. And then somehow I instinctively would push it out in front of me, put it between us, and kind of invite them to step in, and then they'd be gone when I'd open my eyes. And so for some days I was doing this like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, times a day, some, people in a row. And then it started to, those sorts of things kind of faded a bit, not all the way, they didn't go all the way to about age 7 and 8, and they kind of, faded, but again, not to nothing by the time I was 13, which is when I sort of got a kick in the pants through the near-death experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you just, I'm just jumping forward a minute. Do you still see apparitions now today?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not as frequent as it was when I was 3, nor as pronounced, because I don't, even then I was kind of like, I don't think this is what I'm here to
Yeah.
do. This is my calling. So, and it was never something I wanted to sort of, I didn't want to become a medium or anything like that. Or really, if I could be helpful, that's great. But for some reason, I felt it's not my
Yeah.
function to train in that specifically,
Right.
and to work that. I wanted to be a Jedi Knight as a kid, or whatever the hell that was doing. I had this sense as a kid. I guess I should share this too. Maybe some others have it there. I used to, as I would go to sleep, I would go to sleep in some interesting ways, which seemed normal at the time. One way involved me doing this kind of breathing in a certain way, which while I did it would sort of build up this warm, very pleasurable feeling that would then go up my spine, go all the way into my head, and then I would release out the top of my head and go places. And one of the places that I consistently went was this great big mountain, and a mountain in a mountain range. And I kind of thought of that as sort of my nighttime Jedi Academy. And as I got older, sometimes I would be kind of maybe like in a hypnagogic state, I suppose would be the right word for it. This sense of being close to this mountain would kind of impose itself and kind of come in my waking reality. And so I would often be standing in my bedroom, and all of a sudden my bedroom would change. The windows would become much smaller, be higher up. The wall would feel different. Then even the atmosphere and the somatic sense of how big the space is, the smells would change. And I found myself in what kind of looked like a Nepalese or Tibetan type of mountain room. And so that, and more than the visual, there was some kind of, I didn't have the word frequency at the time, but that's a pretty good word for it. There was some kind of tone to that space, which I was innately drawn to. There was something in that, and that within and after the NDE would essentially play a large part in getting me to have a very different life than what I was planning for as a child. Because as a child, I wanted to be a politician and
Wow.
a lawyer. Abraham Lincoln was a hero of mine as a kid, and I thought that's what I'm here to do. I've got a mind that can work that out, and if I have such a mind, it's my responsibility to do good in the world, and to try to be as helpful as I can to my fellow man. And that all went out the window. So
Yeah. Well, you're one of those lucky people that could do a million things. Um, you could have gone a million different ways, but it sounds like your childhood was actually pretty fun. I mean, in terms of your imagination, making things
yeah.
so much more interesting. Um, and so, how old were you at the time of your near-death experience, and what was happening around that time in your life?
At the time, I was 13, and I was in 7th grade. And I did not like school all that much. I mean, I was really good at it. The academics, that was not a problem, but the social side did not start out very well at all, as far as, being very popular or anything like that. And I think at 13, I had gotten a little bit popular, and maybe not in a good way. I'd been good at, when I was 8, I went and talked to my sister and I said, I figured it out, sis, here's my plan. I've figured out that I can read people, and I can put back at them exactly what they want to see. And I can do that really well. And then she said, "Oh, don't be careful about that, because you're going to end up losing yourself." And I was like, no, you'll see. I won't lose myself. I'll have got it all figured out. And then a year later, I basically said, like, oh my God, sis, you were right. I don't know what the hell, when the parents tell me just be yourself, I have no idea what they're talking about, because I just had too many. I had too many selves. I didn't know what they meant by that
Yeah.
advice. And so by the time I was 13, I think I was pretty kind of a smooth operator. And I'm sure I wouldn't have. I'm sure that wouldn't have lasted. I'm sure I didn't need an NDE to handle that. But that's kind of where I was. I had very conventional dreams. Not to say that those are bad at all, but they just ultimately weren't in tune with what was trying to happen. So, it actually happened second to the last day of the school year, which was always a happy time for me. One, because I could get the hell out of school. Two, because I would always get tons of awards at the awards ceremony. I love getting awards. I want to be special and a high achiever, all that sort of stuff. And I had the night before actually broken my arm playing baseball, which is another thing I love to do, is play baseball. So I was boo-hooing the night before about, oh man, I'm going to miss half the baseball season or more, because I was really bummed out. I was having a conversation with my mother, as I often did, kind of winding the night down before I went to bed. All of a sudden, this flash came through, and I didn't think about it. The words just came out of my mouth, and the words were, "Are you going to die soon, Mom?" And it kind of struck her. She kind of, like, it hit her. She took a step back, and then she kind of collected herself. And first she said, "No, I'm not going to die." And then she corrected, so of course she's going to die. She said, "Well, of course I'm going to die, but not for a long time." And she said, "I promise I'll always be there for you as long as you need me." And I said, "Okay, okay." And then I shook whatever it was that came through, and I went to bed. And then the next morning I woke up and just sprang up out of bed, panting, like kind of hyperventilating, really, as if I'd just been running. And it was at that moment that my mother and father were right outside my bedroom door, and I didn't close my door. First, it didn't close. It just needed some sanding. And second, I like to have it open because I've actually felt safer with an open door than a closed door. It's like an um, escape passage. And so then I just told them, I have something I have to tell you. I don't know what it is. I'm so frustrated that I couldn't remember this vitally important message that I was supposed to tell to them specifically. And then they went, and I went to school and did the award ceremony thing, and came back home in the afternoon. And we dropped my sister off at her job at the movie theater on the edge of town, and that's when we had a car accident. And just one of those things where you pull out, and the first car that you can see is going the right speed limit, and you're going to clear them easily. But there was just happened to be, in the moment of decision, a car behind that one that you can't see, that I think at that moment just started to book it. And that's the one that got us. And
Do you
so
remember do you remember knowing it was about to happen, or did it sort of hit you out of nowhere? Did you see it coming?
oh, I did. Well, both. I mean, I did see it coming. But of course, I was actually, my mom asked me to put the Luther Vandross tape in the tape deck. I'd heard enough Luther Vandross for the past several years. I was like, I'm going to negotiate maybe a different music choice.
Yeah.
And so it was with that in mind, that's what I was going to say when I turned to my left. And when I turned to my left, oh my God, there was a massive gray Lincoln right outside my mom's door, really going at high speed. I don't even think they put the brakes on, maybe until the last moment. And it was, there it was. And so in that moment, instead of tensing up, I would have expected myself to tense up in fear. But instead of tensing up, I became totally loose. And there was no fighting it. It was just a sense, okay, this is it. Total acceptance. It wasn't even fighting that I was about to die. That that was a good run, but 13 years was apparently the
Yeah.
length, which I felt a little confusing because that's what I asked myself. I thought this one was going to go more than 13. Huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Had the sense of that, but I was like, all right, well, if that's it, and so then the whole life review happened, which I'd always been fascinated with before.
That's what
Uh,
okay. I usually ask that. So you were aware of near-death experiences
Oh yeah, I watched that
beforehand?
movie Flatliners.
Oh yeah.
It scared the bejesus out of me actually,
Yeah, I forgot
but
about that. I think I saw
I
it in the
saw.
movie theater.
Yeah.
Dating
So I mean,
myself, but yeah.
it was no. It was I saw Flatliners, and I'd watched a lot of In Search of episodes, with Leonard Nimoy,
Mm-hmm.
and so back then in like the '70s, it was all they had was the Bridie Murphy case.
Yeah.
Uh, that's reincarnation, but NDEs were in that mix, and I loved reading the Time Life books.
Yeah.
I would just pick them up at the library, and I knew about Buddhism. I knew about Tibetan Buddhism. I knew about a little about how they went and found their lamas, etc. But of course, I've heard about the life flashing before people's eyes in other contexts, and I thought that's a fascinating happening.
Mm-hmm.
How I was just begging my mind, how can that much material somehow be played and that in
Yeah.
milliseconds? It was just fascinating to me, and so I kind of got my desire right there. I thought, I'd love to have that experience
Yeah.
every time I heard about it, and there it was. But in this case, it was so much more than even the amazing experience I thought people were having. Because in my case, there was this kind of a sense of this vast, um, benevolent, totally objective flavor of consciousness that at first was like this sort of separate consciousness, like God, or like one's conscience, or Virgil in the Divine Comedy, but bigger. And we were just looking at every frame of my life, and kind of see that, like, and anytime we came upon fear or lying, anytime I contracted and sort of fought against life by trying to lean into sort of the tricks and machinations of the separate self sense, we saw it and we forgave it. And often, like a lot of other people report, there was a sense of even sort of seeing how my actions, or how my internal choices, more than my actions, but the internal state affected other people for seeming for good and for ill. And we forgave everything. Any grudge I held against someone else was forgiven, and all of it was just sort of wiped. And of course, at the same time, we looked at some of the home runs, so to
Yeah.
speak, and some of them were ones that I didn't even remember, and I didn't even think, like, is that a home run? Yeah, I wouldn't have thought that at the time, but when I saw them in this life review, I was like, oh my God, that was beautiful. That thing that just happened right there, that moment, that quiet moment of appreciating a leaf, floating in a puddle on the asphalt of the playground the fall day. And whatever it was that I was recognizing at that moment was profound, more profound than I knew it all. And so, yes, and then once that played out, there was this wonderful sense of oneness with everything. And it was, again, I was back into that non-local consciousness that I experienced as a very little baby or toddler, and just maybe a little bit squared or
Yeah.
cubed, in its intensity and its the far-reaching nature of it.
When
Uh,
you were
yeah,
experiencing this, was it like watching a movie or were you back in it?
both. I mean, it was more real. It was hyper real. Like, so I was back in it, but I was at the same time watching a movie. There was a sense of being more in it than I could have been at the time, because at the time, I was tripping on my own ego. And when you're living through your ego, you're seeing like 20% of what's going on.
Yeah.
And only so it was more real because I was seeing 100%. I was there 100% in the experiences. It was also detached because at the same time there was a sense of being moored into an even vaster part of the soul, or part of pure consciousness, which later, in meditation school, we would call the witnessing consciousness. And so they were both happening at the same time, with it seamlessly, without any kind of awkwardness or dissociative sense. So yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Um, and so you see this life review and then do you go right back to your body, or is there more that happens in that
There's
experience?
more that happens, because I mean, the funny thing was, I had the life review before we got hit by the other car. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
because I was voluntarily pulling the eject button, right there, like, all right, just get the process going, and so after the life review finished, and it did finish, it was interesting. It kind of finished into eternity. It was as if the whole timeline that I'd experienced was infused with this sense of light and infinity and timelessness, and then looking out in my body for that split second before bam, it was the most beautiful moment I'd had up to that time in life, as far as the totality of experiencing. There weren't any filters that were blocking the experience. I could see, I was looking at the dashboard. I had a sense of the molecules and the atoms that made up the molecules, but below the atoms I had a sense that this was love.
Yeah.
And even thinking that was a thought that sort of filtered up into the small band of the conscious mind, was everything was made of love. And I looked at the sky and it was like, yeah. And when I thought everything was made of love, there was also a sense of, it's been all you the whole time. There's a sense of, I wasn't raised with any religion, so I didn't have a lot of religious terms sort of floating around in my mind that often. But I did have a sense that, you know, if I could translate now, I'd say I had a sense that the kingdom of heaven had been here the whole time,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what everything is made of, and
That's
that's the
so
secret of
cool.
life.
Oh, that's
And
so
then,
cool. Because I've said that to people. My friend, one of my best friends, was asking me. I was telling her about this particularly detailed mediumship reading I was able to do, where even I was like shocked because the things I came up with were so specific, including the person's nickname, including, I said, they're showing me 1950s and a little boy opening the cereal box, and there are those little prizes inside of them.
mm,
And she said he, as an adult, he collected those, and he collected like Cracker Jack boxes, and vintage cereal boxes. And I was like, how on earth would I ever know that in a million
yeah,
years? And then I said, I see a rhino. And she said, yes, we have these little figurines, and he's the rhino, I'm the elephant, my daughter's the dragon. And I'm like, what? How do I know that? And so she said, she said, I believe you, but I don't understand it. And I
yeah,
said, what people think is that heaven is this place, like it's up there, or, it's not, it's actually all in the same place. It's just a matter of there's a veil there, and our vibrations are different. And obviously there are different interpretations, but I was saying, I think there's this misunderstanding that it's a different place from where we are, but it's actually where we are. It's just sort of a different dimension, and we have access to that other dimension, but we're at such a lower frequency as human beings. We have to expand our aura to sort of, and I can't even pick up half of it, but that's the way we're able to pick up that stuff, is that it is here. It's all here. And it's really just yours for the taking, which I would love to hear. You don't have to go into it right now, but your thoughts on sort of manifestation, if you believe in
mm,
that, because I've started to do it and watch it happen
mm.
in my life, that I'm like, this is so crazy, because I believe that stuff is already there. You just have to sort of meet it where it is, and raise your vibration to meet it. It sounds so, to some people, I'm sure, very like woo woo and crazy, but I'd love to hear your take on that, or
Oh, I've
what
had a
your
lot of
interpretation is.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could get into that.
Yeah. I'd love to, because I just think
Before
it's
I
really
say
interesting.
that,
Yeah.
I even want to say, you kind of framed it as expanding our aura. I'll put an obverse, another
Yeah.
side to that coin. Um, in some ways, the trick is simply just ceasing to juggle the balls that we're unconsciously juggling, that we don't remember that we're doing. When we stop hitting ourselves in the head with a hammer, we just don't know we're doing it. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of, I kind of think of it in terms of, well, I do this meditation practice called ascension, but that sometimes that name gives people a sense of, like, ooh, flying out of your body.
Right.
In my case, I could call it just as well descension, because I had
Yeah.
effectively I felt uncomfortable with callousness and the callousness of the world, and kind of how mean I even felt the other school children were. And I without knowing it, kind of been out of my body in a certain sense for much of my childhood. Doing the meditation practice brought me back in. And there was a sense of like, okay, that I was, we just kind of jettisoned some of these defense mechanisms. And now, simply because they're gone, I can see so much more of what's going on.
It's like a spiritual make under, which is really interesting. And it's
Yeah.
also kind of like when you're dieting and people say, "What should I eat?" And I always say, it's more about what you shouldn't eat, or like if you want to be healthy and reduce inflammation and lose some weight, it's not about what you eat, it's about not eating sugar. Not eat and kind of, I don't know if it's really that great an analogy, but yeah, it's already
No,
there. There's
it
just
is.
all this other stuff mucking it up, which would be in my mind, the sugar or the
Yes.
preservatives or the trans fats or
Yeah.
whatever. Really, it's like just eat whole foods, just stick to the basics, and
Yeah. There's
you'll
a
lose weight.
there's a lot of addition via subtraction. Absolutely.
Yes, yeah,
Yes.
that's I think where
Yeah.
my mind went. That's really interesting. And so then in your near-death experience, did you see entities at that point, or was it all this telepathic osmosis knowledge that everyone talks
No.
about, I think?
Yeah, yeah, no entities, no tunnel. I didn't go anywhere. I was actually in some ways more in my body again than I'd ever been to that point. And I had a lot of osmosis of knowledge before that and after that. Definitely helped me through school and helped me. I won a lot of competitions where you guess the number of jelly beans in a jar at like a bank. For some reason, it would just turn on then and no.
Yeah.
But in the NDE itself, it was just the love. I think that was really the most important thing. Was there's such a sense of total resolution and peace with everything,
Yeah.
and that was like, yeah, that was, I couldn't have wanted anything more than
That's
that.
the universal theme, I think. What is it that brought you back to your body, or at what point do you remember returning to your body?
Oh, I remember waking up and hearing the sound of the um, dinging of the seatbelt bell going off, and that was, and I'd been concussed. I remember my head hitting the window to my side. I didn't have any bleeding or bruising or anything like that, but it was an awful thump. And so when I got up, they were pulling us out of the car and using those big giant skill saws to, cut in. And I didn't know what my name was. They were asking me all these questions. They're trying to ascertain if I had spinal damage, being very careful, and putting me on the gurney and supporting me just right. And the only thing I knew was, oh, that's my mom over there. And I didn't know anybody's name or much else. I just knew that relationship. And so then I was in the van, and the interesting in the van was I was, kind of, they had me strapped down the head so that my neck was stable in case I had any, big injuries. But I was looking out, and at the same time, I had the sense of floating at the top of the ambulance, and they were simultaneous. So it's kind of like a perceptual sandwich in the space of the ambulance. And then my mother called my name out a couple times, and the second time that she called me, well, I replied both times, but the second time that I replied, she got it. And what I replied was, "I'm okay." And basically, I heard her breathing totally change and become completely peaceful. And she let go, and I felt her, kind of leave. I didn't. I was so concussed that I didn't think, "Oh, my mom's leaving her body. She's
Right.
dying now." I just thought, okay, they're gonna get us to the hospital, and I wasn't thinking anything actually.
Yeah.
Next thing I know, we're in the suppose the operating room, and I'm out. I guess they figured out that I was mainly okay. They're working to try to save my mom's life, and my sister's now there next to me, and she's crying because she doesn't know if I'm screwed up. Um, and then my dad came out and he said, "Your mother's gone." And so that was just like the biggest blow. Yeah, before or since at this point, that's the biggest
Yeah.
blow of emotional blow of the life. And next thing I knew, we're being walked out of the hospital, being taken home, and it was kind of um, a blur like that for two days. It's definitely in shock.
Yeah.
And what was interesting to me was after the shock and while I was going through grief, like in a textbook, I noticed that there was this, this vastness, this joy, and that the joy was very strange to me because I
Yeah.
was also feeling terrible and angry, very angry. I didn't really believe in a God necessarily, but I thought if there is one, I'm really pissed, on my mom back. So go out in the garage and I punch the wall really hard and punch the door in anger. But even when I was doing that, there was this quiet, and it was fascinating to me because it was so pronounced, and I wasn't doing anything to make it happen. And so I started playing with that. Basically, I was like, okay, I can't shake this sense of depth and quietude and presence is always there. I'm going to let myself relax into it. And then, I wasn't even thinking in these terms. I was just kind of playing with it like a kid would. And that was absolutely fascinating because
Yeah.
I found that I could have all these emotions flowing through me, but they weren't hurting me. The pain was there, but there wasn't any suffering. And and so I was like, that's interesting, because everybody
Yeah.
around me seemed to be having a much worse time. Like we're all going through grieving, but it's like it wasn't weighing me down in the same way, or
Yeah. Which,
that seemed to be the case.
and at such a young age too, I don't even know how you process something like that. That's such a humongous loss. And that sounds like such a gift, even though it doesn't lessen the pain, just that you were able to be
No,
in that. It almost sounds like you had sort of one foot still on the other side and one foot here, where you may not have realized it, but there was this knowing that all was well in the grand scheme of the universe
yeah,
and how it all works. But um, ugh, I'm so sorry that that happened to you, but it is beautiful to hear that that was your experience of having that inner knowing, that there was some sense of peace along with it. Um, did you at any point, because I know you had sort of communicated with those who had passed on, did you have messages from your mother that were clear to you?
no,
Did you have
no,
nothing? It was, yeah,
nothing, nothing.
yeah,
In fact, like must have been 1 or 2 years later, I went to this workshop at the local metaphysical bookstore where I often or hung out, and I went to contact your spirit guide workshop, and it seemed that it worked. Like I found myself, closed my eyes with the intent, found myself going up this elevator again out the top of my head, like I hadn't done since I was a little kid. I met these beings up there, for lack of a better word, and I said, "Hey," it's like, "Oh, like, oh, hey there. We don't need to tell you anything. You know all you need to know." Bye. And I
yeah.
went back down, and I kind of, from that interaction, I kind of got the sense, oh yeah, I don't think I'm going to be having any contact of that sort with my mother.
Because she knew you were
And
okay.
that,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it seemed like that was just the start of a period, like right after the NDE, all that presence that was in the background of all sorts of stuff. I mean, I still had the psychology of a teenage boy.
Yeah.
Those elements are there. They were just oddly juxtaposed with this sense that I extended 100 feet back behind me. There's this sense of vastness, and then there is still this, person, this young developing teenager. But then when the access to that 100-foot hallway kind of closed off, boy, was life hard. It really hit, and I was just it was difficult for me to do the next school year.
Yeah.
I don't actually know how I made it through it so well. Um, and so that after that school year was over, I was hungry. I was like, okay, what do we do now? It's like that's when I did my personal growth, was in the summers in between school years, because I had the space to do it. And it's like I got to somehow get back to whatever it was I was experiencing. And so I, and just started doing whatever I needed to do. I can spare some of the details, but eventually it led me to the metaphysical bookshop without, outside of my volition. And I opened up a book on the experiences of Himalayan yogis, I think it was. And I turned to a certain page, and they were listing the qualities of the experience that they were having, and they were exactly the same in my mind as what I'd been experiencing back then. And so then I realized, okay, I don't have to get into a car accident or jump off of a height or get close to death to access that. I could do it through some other means that these people over on the other side of the world are apparently doing or have done. And okay, that's interesting. Maybe that's possible. And so
Yeah.
the seeds of learning meditation were really planted there, although it took me some years to actually get to it because I was also at the same time afraid. I had the sense that if I opened up that door, I wouldn't be able to live even a semblance of the normal life that I had wanted before and that my family wanted for me. And I thought I still wanted sometimes. I knew that if I opened up that door, that's going to be off the table. And so I really kind of tried to do this kind of dance through high school, at least for the first 2 or 3 years of, kind of, okay, I don't have to be a politician. Maybe I can meet in the middle. That meant, okay, I could be like an actor or musician, or an artist or something like that. I never thought I'd do those much before. And that it became increasingly obvious that that was not going to be my destiny. And so eventually I just opened that door, and one thing led to another, and didn't take long before I was 18 and graduated from high school, and I'm living in an ashram on the Oregon coast. And that's
That's what took you there. Yeah.
yeah.
And I know you had also mentioned when we were speaking before the camera was on about, you said you were 14, I think, when you were sitting in a tree and you had
uh
had that vision of being in the Himalayas. Tell me about
yeah.
that.
Yeah, maybe I was even 15. It was my freshman year, sometimes into my sophomore year of high school. And oddly, I was not a happy camper, which was strange. A big part of my previous ego and then ego conditioning was like, oh, I'm good at school. I'm going to be valedictorian or something like that someday. I was not interested at all. I had this yearning that I couldn't put words to that was coming up in my chest. It was a normal teenage boy yearning. These were deep visions of robed figures in meditation in faraway mountains. I had this sense that I have to, I got to either go to the Himalayas or I got to go to Seattle. I don't know why Seattle, but I thought I got to get to like Mount Rainier, and so these were very strong, and they were so strong that I'd have to go to the edge of my high school's soccer field or campus, the effective boundary where if I stepped further I could get in serious trouble, and I didn't want that. But I'd go climb this cherry tree, and I'd look out longingly, in the in an eastward direction, and I would even kind of berate myself for being a coward for not stowing away on some ship and making my way over to the Himalayas. But it was a very strong impulse that was
Yeah,
there, and I had no idea how to satisfy that impulse. So it was just
definitely
dealing with myself.
had a much stronger vision than I did at 14 or 15, whatever that was. I was drooling over Kirk Cameron and Growing Pains and just watching sitcoms and like hanging out with my friends, and
I mean,
that's
I
it,
was doing that at the same time too,
Yeah.
but I mean, not Kirk Cameron, obviously, but I mean, it was a big mixed bag. So
Yeah.
it's like that was just there, and I didn't know what to do with it, and it didn't necessarily fit some of the more normal shallow interests
Right.
that I had either. And just eventually, it wanted to win out,
Yeah.
and I remember finding myself watching of the Franco Zeffirelli St. Francis picture, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, and I was so touched. And I remember this one scene in particular where it's basically his scene where he decides to go be a monk. He takes his clothes off, gives them to his father, gets permission from the local bishop, walks out naked out of the town in the direction of San Gimignano, the church he's going to. He quotes the Bible, and I want to be like the birds in the sky and the lilies in the field. And isn't that what the gospel is all about? Oh my God, it's like, yeah, that's the yearning in there.
And that's why you
That's
went to the ashram in Oregon.
many reasons, but
Many
yeah,
reasons, but one of them, yeah.
a straw. Reading Yogananda's autobiography of Yogi
Yeah.
helped considerably as well.
And
And I had
what was
asked,
that like?
Oh, sorry, go
Oh
ahead.
God. Oh no, no. It was like this, like with so many people that I talk to, it seems to land in their life when they're ripe for it.
Hmm.
And I remember even reading the first few pages, it felt as if like my heart was being massaged, opened up, and the energy of life was moving up through my torso. And it was such joy just in reading the book, much less doing an actual meditation practice.
Right.
I was just reading it, and I was like, okay, there's a different way. I had not been I hadn't, Yogananda was my window. His book was my window into a great deal of different spiritual traditions, which I wasn't all that familiar with under the umbrella of Hinduism. And so there was something deeply resonant about that, and deeply resonant about the name Babaji. And I remember coming to this part of the book where Yogananda says, whoever earnestly prays to Babaji, he'll hear you. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do that. So I was just, kind of every night in the deepest part of my meditation, I'd pray to Babaji and say like, hey, I don't know if you can hear me. I'm just some young kid in Wisconsin, but I could sure use some help finding what my dharmic path is supposed to be, because I don't exactly know. And should I be in college and meditate for 2 or 3 hours a day at the same time, or do I need to do something more extreme and go off to some monastery? Because I'd be down for that, maybe even more. And I started sending out to different monasteries and ashrams of many different types. So there were 2 or 3 places in Crestone, Colorado, I got brochures from. And I got a brochure. They did brochures in those days. I got a brochure from the Ananda Kriya Yoga folks up in Nevada City, California. I got brochures from Self-Realization Fellowship. But each time I got them, none of them quite were, they didn't have that frequency that I remembered from as a child. Because actually, as I was doing meditation, kind of rough discipline meditation at the time, but still getting effect as I did that. And as I read things like Autobiography of a Yogi, I felt that frequency getting stronger. And so in some ways, when that would get strong, that would be kind of like an indicator to me that I might be, nosing in on the right direction. And so I prayed to Babaji, and I kind of felt an answer come down, in the form of this kind of ball of frequency coming down to the top of my head, kind of with a message: pay attention to this. And so okay. And a few days later, I was returning home from picking up cigarette butts from the streets of my town. I was returning home, and then my future brother-in-law, my sister were right outside our front door as I was coming home, and my future brother-in-law invited me to a class in the meditation practice that he'd done for about a year and a half to 2 years, and I'd not previously been interested to learn it. I could tell he was getting something out of it. But it didn't attract me at all. Their website and marketing, I was like, well, I don't know, that's not for me. But when he asked, that frequency filled my body like I was a gong which just been hit.
Hmm.
And I found myself, I didn't think yes, I didn't respond, I just found yes coming out of my mouth. I was like, I guess we're saying yes, it's just okay, we're gonna go with this. And so I did, and I still wasn't expecting rationally anything from the
Right.
class. In fact, the words workshop and seminar, I usually had associations of, okay, this is what middle-aged Americans do to kind of temporarily distract themselves from really doing deep work.
Yeah.
And that was my, idea. And so I went into the class, and I was like, I don't know, these techniques are in English, praise, gratitude, and love. Well, I'm into Zen, like hit me with a bamboo stick, man, ask me to jump off a cliff and prove I was a little severe. And, but when I did that first technique, good Lord. Now, not everybody has this experience. That's why I don't often share this in classes, because I don't want
Because you don't
people
want
to get
people to,
these chasing
yeah,
something and getting
have
despondent. And
expectations.
no, yeah, you're going to be innocent, but I think I needed that. And I think that, some reason in some ways it was sort of an answer to all my asceticism and all my ascetic prayers, hook me up with where I need to go. And that was it. I was still skeptical. I was like, okay, we're going to give this a trial period, because maybe, it's just, but over the course of that weekend and the next couple of weeks, I found, boy, immediate growth happening outside of the meditation practice. I found buttons that were regular buttons not there anymore, which was fascinating to me because it's not like I did any deep psychological work. I would just sit down and do these prayer mantras, let thoughts happen. I wasn't even needing to concentrate, which this was all anathema to my previous experience. And yet psychological transformation seemed to be happening. And so I was like, okay, we're going to tentatively go with this for a while, see where it takes us. And it didn't take long before I was like, okay, yeah, I got to get to, if these people have a monastery or an ashram or anything where they can take a young whippersnapper like me and, I'll do anything. I'll camp out outside, but if I can find people who are dedicated to using this practice in a very one-pointed way, let me in. And so eventually I found one out on the Oregon coast and, made my way via Seattle to that place and didn't look back.
And what goes on at an ashram?
God, I think that there's so many different types of ashrams that I couldn't paint too broad of a picture.
What went
but
on where you were? What were the
well,
days
yeah,
like?
God, I loved it. I mean, when I first got there, most people were kind of on a schedule, and it was lovely. I was waking up pretty damn early still because that was my habit. So I would sometimes have like 4 hours of meditation in the morning from 6 a.m. or before to about 10 a.m. Squeeze a shower in there, do some yoga asanas in the morning before my meditation, some pranayama, but have a long block of meditation. Then from about 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., it would be work time. And my first work detail was yard beautification. I was working with a lovely man named Troticum, and we were basically cleaning up all the branches that had fallen in the storm and putting them into the ones that were too small for kindling, putting them into a bonfire, and then turning the rest into firewood. And that was a fun thing to do for my first few weeks. And then later, the group had bought a restaurant, a cafe, and I considered myself very lucky to be able to work at the cafe. And I started as a dishwasher, and then I worked all the different jobs that you could in the cafe until I was trained by a really wonderful chef, funnily with the name Yogananda, who was Mexican, but he looked just like Paramahansa Yogananda. At least at that time in his life, the resemblance was quite strong. And so I was sort of apprenticed to him for several months, and then eventually was kind of co-running the kitchen. And a fascinating sort of thing. You were talking about manifestation before. That in my life is kind of sort of one of those big examples, because like a year before I knew anything about these people or this meditation practice, when I was thinking, oh, I'm going to go to maybe an East Coast college or a liberal arts college in the Midwest, and I'll meditate. I was still a junior in high school. I asked myself, where am I going to be a year from now? It's one of those things where I had the intuition. I had this whole picture then come up with narration that said, in fact, you're going to be living with a bunch of monks who run a mostly vegetarian cafe. You'll start as the dishwasher and you'll get trained in all the jobs until you're the head chef. And I had this vision of looking out of the kitchen through sort of a ticket window, seeing a juice and coffee bar in the background, and seeing what the wall looked like. And it was so detailed, all of it. And I thought, okay, thank you for the very detailed answer, whoever gave that to me, but I don't think that's very likely. And I just kind of happily went on with what I was doing and forgot about it until I was there, actually, until I was on the phone interviewing for the job. They said, we're going to have a cafe. I said, really?
Yeah, and you didn't
Okay.
seek that out. That was something that came to you, which
Yes.
I'd love to talk about just a little bit, because when we talk about manifestation, that usually it's so interesting because there are several things. One is with manifestation, you're visualizing what you want, but you're feeling what you want. You're putting yourself in there, in that space. And I have found that the more I do that, the more these things come to life. And some of it's obviously, if you have an intention and you're
Yeah.
focused on it, you'll go for it. But sometimes things don't necessarily line up
Yeah.
to bring you to that point. And then there's the other thing that I think is interesting, which is almost as if in your case, you were sort of catching a glimpse into your future.
as if you somehow became privy to your life's path that was sort of
Yes.
preordained. I don't know if that's really the right thing, but um, you seem to have glimpses into how your life was going to go and how it looked. And so I wonder what you think about what's really going on there.
So I actually kind of think that the former that you described, which is
Right.
the classic thing, and that's something I've engaged in as well, and had stuff, come. But I think that the former actually backs down into the latter,
Yeah.
and that they're at base really essentially the same thing
Yep.
at the core. And in fact, I prefer to do it down there than to do it up here. My reason for that, not to say that that's necessarily bad, is I always had a feeling that I could get myself a little bit entangled and a
Mhm.
little bit too invested if I'm spending too much time in the individual volition. And so my preference was to sort of like, let it be, but back into sort of, this is why people do like if it's in God's will,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But I like to be sitting near the sort of the source of consciousness, the quiet, bubbly source. And another way I've experienced it or framed what I'm experiencing is as I almost view things as kind of a multiverse or have a sense of different time tracks that are all kind of existing. And in the more lucid moments, I almost had a sense that I was feeling into these multiple futures and I could actually feel the relative percentages of them happening. And I could as if modulate my own note. I think of it musically. Okay, do I want to be more C sharp or do I want to be C or do I want to be C flat? Which way am I which way do I want to play this?
Right.
And so that was part of it. But in say the meditation practice of there's this term that is plucked out of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which is Ritambhara Pragya, which can be translated the level of truth that the level of consciousness that upholds divine truth, something like that. Now that doesn't sound like manifestation in the way those words are going together, but how it's often fleshed out is that if you're quiet enough, if you can go down into that space of samadhi, um, in which the mind is kind of resting into the boundless, it's any thought that is entertained at that subtle level and doesn't break the surface is like taking a pebble and dropping it into a pond, and then the ripples are uniform and large and coherent. And so that's the sense that anything that's entertained there, then there's a lot of oomph behind it, as opposed to when we're thinking 50,000 thoughts a day, and we're
Right.
just throwing a lot of pebbles in there, and everything's kind of going hither and yon and
Yeah.
making
That's
quite a mess.
so well articulated. And in terms of manifesting, I just find it so fascinating because I recently I just moved from LA to Virginia, and I was unpacking, kind of like looking through my stuff, and I hadn't opened this little box I have on my dresser for a while, and I looked in it and there were all these little notes I'd written a year ago. When I lived in LA, I was in a
Hmm.
relationship with someone who didn't want to leave California, and I opened up all these notes and I'm like, I live on the East Coast with forest and a creek in my backyard. Check. Um, I at the time I had lost my voice because of a vocal disorder, so I wasn't working in voiceover for a long time. So I had lost my career for a long time, so I had run out of money. And I had written, I receive blank amount of money, and it was an amount, there's no way, it was like an impossible amount. Like
Hmm.
how would that even happen? I haven't worked in, 2 years. And I said, I received this amount of money from an unexpected source. Well, then last year, a relative passed away and she left me the exact amount that I had written down. I mean, it wasn't the exact amount, but I had the difference in my bank account. And when I put it in there, I wrote myself a check for that amount and visualized it in my bank account. And sure enough, I put it in my bank account and there it was. And
Yeah,
this was a relative I love, but we weren't close. There was no,
yeah.
her giving that to me was such an unexpected gift that I was so blown away by. I mean, I thank her every day in spirit. And there were all these things like that that I'd written down that I didn't know how it was going to happen. It didn't look likely. And every single thing, I get my voice back and I'm working in voiceover full time again. And that's happening now. And all of these things that I had struggled with suddenly just all, when I wrote it down and put it in that box and
Yeah.
said, God, I don't know how it's going to happen. I'm leaving it up to you. And I know that you want what's in my highest and best. So I'm releasing this to you. And if this, it feels, like it is in my highest and best, then please let it be. And everything I had written down is
Yeah.
what I have right now. And I said I had a podcast that created a community. It has just all kinds of things. So I want to know what you think about about manifest, anything you want to share about manifestation or why it works, how it works, any insights at all around that.
Yeah. Well, God, this is such a fascinating topic with
I
so many
know
different,
I could go on about it for like
so
10
many different
hours, but
threads
yeah,
we could tease out of them. So I'm trying to be succinct and coherent
yeah,
here. But one way I think of it is actually um, the wave ocean analogy of the individual to the total self, the infinite self, that we're in fact all of us, we think we're the waves, or we may think we're the wave, but in reality we're the whole ocean. And I think that, and the more that we're able to relax kind of our nervous system, the more we're able to kind of dip deeper into the ocean than just the itty bitty teeny tiny top of the wave. I think there's more support, because it's not that there's anything less sacred about the wave. It, after all, is still the ocean. So there's nothing less sacred, or we need not judge the desires that we have at all, um, even if they've been filtered, which
yeah,
many are. But when we do dive into the ocean, I think it has a tendency of, it's like we're tubes. We spend a lot of time kind of like little drinking straws, but in fact the amount of water, the amount of life that's trying to flow through us, which includes different experiences, fulfillment of different desires, everything is constricted, because it's like it's a whole ocean trying to move through a tiny straw. And so when we do have those moments, whether by grace or spiritual practice or both or whatever, of letting this, of expanding beyond the straw, then things happen. We just need more space to let life live through us, instead of trying to sort of usurp uh, everything and control everything, and which has this unfortunate tendency, of course, of blocking off often the very love that we deep in our hearts want. And also, as we do that, then we become more sophisticated with our desiring too. Instead of wanting the thing that's at the top, we want the thing we really want, which sometimes the thing we really want is love.
yeah.
This is a classic example. Not to invoke a trope here, but I think what we really want is love. Of course, then love goes through all these different uh, bits of conditioning, and then it turns into a bottle of beer or something like that. And
Right.
not to say that a bottle of beer isn't actually in itself a sacred thing. It's just, it's not always the thing that we really want.
Yeah.
So
I
I
knew
think that's a part of it. Yeah.
I knew you'd say something profound and articulate. I think that's beautiful. I mean, I know you could come up with like 100 other uh, insights, but I love what you just said. And I also think I love that you really talk about letting go and letting it be and letting it flow. It's that whole thing about you find peace when you stop fighting the current. It's
Yeah.
and go with the flow. And I'm learning that more and more as someone who struggled with anxiety, who still has
Mm,
anxiety. And I actually take
mm,
medication because I'm so anxious that
mm.
I just my emotions can be so big. And it's okay, but it needs to be a little tempered, or cannot rationally. But apart from that, I've learned meditation is every day for me if I can. Yoga, and these things have helped calm my nervous system
Yeah.
naturally as well. And then but it's also the understanding that things will fall into place in my highest and best good. So I don't have to try. I just have to be open to receiving them. Doesn't mean I just sit here and wait for things to happen. I definitely need to have goals and desires and work.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the more I've just learned to just ride the wave and let it go and realize that if this doesn't work out, it's because it wasn't in my highest and best good. So it's a little, even if it's disappointing, well, but I know that something better will come, and it always
Yeah.
does. And it's
Yeah.
just made things so much easier when I just stopped manipulating, controlling. And that's also something I learned through 12 step, through 10 years of
Mm,
recovery.
mm,
And that's why I hate to be trite with this. People say, oh, it changed my life. It changed my life because
yeah.
you learn as an addict, you're just trying so hard to manipulate, control. I need things
Mm,
to be this way or I'm not going to be okay. And what you learn is you have to give that up to God, whatever your understanding of God is. It could just be a doorknob if you're not religious. It could be just the universe. It could be nature. But once you give up that control, things start to move because you're
yeah.
allowing. And that's what you were just talking about, which I love. And I mean, man, my life is so much different now because of that concept. And it's hard sometimes to let go when things are stressful.
Oh, it is incredibly hard. It's one of those damn things that used to piss the hell out of me when people would say it. It's one of those easier said than done things.
Yeah.
I'm of the type that I was really helped by having something practical and consistent that I could do every day, and it didn't matter how I felt, and it didn't matter if I was pissed off or in bliss. The thing was kind of mechanical,
Hmm.
and so, like, over days, months, and years, it was as if I was sort of saturating myself into a layer of our being that's timeless, that's really timeless, that's timeless and deathless, and it's vaster than any possible problem that could trip me up. And it was as if, it's kind of like being a cloth that's put into a dye and taken out, and the color fades a bit because you have a rough day or any day. But if you just keep, I found that if I just kept going in consistently into the dye, that, over time, it was as if, okay, wow, why, that thing over there should bother me, or
Yeah.
like, wow, I'm having a conversation with somebody, but at the same time, I have this beautiful sense the of this unmoving space. What T.S. Eliot called the still point in the turning axle of the world so aptly. So
Yeah.
I think that finding that eye of the hurricane, which we all have inside us, finding that is I think one of the most potent vehicles for actually being able to let go. Because
Mm.
if you think that you're this little um, billiard ball in a chaotic tornado of other billiard balls, like, who's going to let go then? Because it's scary as hell.
Yeah.
So we have to have some means of touching some other depth that isn't at all affected by what's going on at the surface.
Yeah.
And
And that's our work. I think that's our work as
yeah,
human beings is, and I hear that a lot in manifesting, is understanding that all is well no matter what's going on around you. And that doesn't make sense to us as humans because look at this is a shit show.
no,
I mean,
no,
it's like
no,
it
yeah,
isn't
yeah,
all well. It isn't, but in the scheme of things and where we end up and where our souls
yeah,
end up, it's all orchestrated in a way. And, you know, there's a lot of there's a lot of terrible stuff that happens. And I don't
oh
mean
god, yeah,
we just sit back and go, oh well, it's all gonna be fine. Let's not do anything about it. But to a degree, if you can at least just try to remember that we're souls, we're here visiting, these challenges are presented us to us so that we can learn from them, grow from them, and they may be awful. It might be terrible. But I think learning to let go of the things that we cannot control is the
yeah,
serenity prayer. I mean, the serenity prayer is
yeah,
basically my mantra to life, which is, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's the whoever wrote that is genius. It's
yeah.
just the best. So I think you have so much incredible wisdom. I can't wait to read what you write. And I'm so honored that you came here today to share some spiritual to kind of drop some spiritual knowledge on on us, but also you're just such a humble, regular person. And I think it's that's what I really like to do is have people who are relatable, who have had these incredible spiritual experiences, but who are very accessible and very normal, and very relatable. So thank you for being that person and for being here.
Thank you. It's a
My
pleasure.
pleasure.
Goodbye.